My phone slipped under the passenger seat of my boyfriend's car, and when I reached down to grab it, I ended up pulling out a used condom that definitely wasn't ours. We'd been together for 3 years, I'd been on birth control since the beginning of the relationship, and yet there it was, this tiny piece of evidence wrecking my mind in the middle of a parking lot. Then I found a pharmacy receipt from 2 days earlier, the exact same night he swore he was working late. There are moments in life that split you in half. Not with a scream, not with a fight, not with some dramatic midnight confession. They split you silently, in some random parking lot, with the 3 o'clock sun beating down on you and a small transparent plastic bag dangling from your fingers. That's how my life split apart. His name was Marcus. Marcus Rivera. He was 28, had a smile that could convince you of almost anything, and he had spent 3 years with me. 3 years in which I had been faithful, present, completely devoted. 3 years in which I had taken my pills every single day at the exact same time, with the quiet discipline of someone building a life with another person and refusing to leave anything to chance. That day we had gone grocery shopping together. One of those ordinary Sunday errands that mean absolutely nothing until suddenly they mean everything. He was returning the cart while I waited in the car, messing around on my phone, when it slipped from my hands and fell straight under the passenger seat. I leaned down, reached underneath, felt around the carpeted floor searching for the familiar rectangle of my phone, and my fingers touched something else. At first I didn't understand what it was. I pulled it out thinking it was a crumpled napkin, a gum wrapper, anything mundane. But when I held it in front of my eyes, I had to blink twice before my brain could process what I was looking at. It was a used condom, rolled up inside its transparent plastic wrapper, as if someone had carefully saved it before throwing it away and simply forgotten the part where they actually threw it away. I went completely still. Outside, the sun stayed exactly the same. A little boy ran past the car chasing a red ball. An older man carried grocery bags toward his blue pickup truck. The world kept moving with that brutal indifference the world has whenever something inside someone collapses. I couldn't move. My mind started operating on 2 tracks at once. The first track was rational, almost scientific. Marcus and I did not use condoms. We never had. From the beginning of the relationship, I'd been on birth control, and that had always been enough for both of us. He knew that. I knew that. There was no parallel universe where that thing had an innocent explanation inside his car. The second track was emotional, and that track didn't think in words but in images. Marcus laughing with me in the kitchen. Marcus holding my hand at the movies. Marcus saying I love you before falling asleep in that low, steady voice I had learned to need. I was still staring at the wrapper when I heard the driver's door open. All set, he said, buckling his seatbelt. Pretty fast today, huh? Sundays are usually more crowded. I said nothing. He started the car. Rested one hand on my knee with that automatic, affectionate gesture he always had, the gesture I had interpreted 1,000 times as proof that we were solid, stable, real. I let his hand stay there and didn't move a muscle. You okay? He asked a few seconds later, I still on the road. Yeah, I said. I'm just tired. And it was true. I was tired. Just not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep. I slipped the condom into the pocket of my jacket. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I needed proof. Maybe because my brain still hadn't fully accepted what my eyes had seen. Maybe because part of me, the most terrified part, was still hoping there was some explanation. We got home, carried the groceries upstairs. Marcus turned on music and started putting things into the pantry like it was any other Sunday. And I went into the bathroom, sat on the edge of the bathtub, pulled the wrapper back out of my pocket, and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened my jacket to put it away again, and my fingers brushed against something else. A folded piece of paper. A receipt that had gotten stuck in the same pocket by accident, one I had grabbed without realizing while searching the glove compartment for a pen before we went into the store. It was a pharmacy receipt. Date, Thursday. Exactly 2 days ago. The Thursday Marcus had texted me at 9 at night saying he had to stay late at the office because there was an urgent report due. The Thursday I had eaten dinner alone, left a plate waiting for him in the microwave, and fallen asleep expecting him to come home. My hands started shaking. It took me several minutes to read the receipt clearly because my hands wouldn't stop shaking and my eyes refused to focus. When I finally managed to make out the details, the first thing I noticed was the time 8:47 Thursday night. A pharmacy 15 minutes from our apartment, on a route I knew well because I passed it every time I went to the gym. There were 3 items on the receipt. A box of condoms, a pack of wet wipes, and a bottle of mineral water. I read the list 4 times in a row. There was no alternative interpretation. No way to twist the information into something innocent. At 8:47 on Thursday night, while I was heating up pasta in our kitchen and texting him to ask if he wanted me to save him dinner, Marcus was in a pharmacy buying condoms. I wondered how long he'd been doing this. That question was the hardest one, because it never came alone. It arrived with an entire army of smaller questions crowding behind it. Who was she? Was it someone I knew? Had it happened in our apartment? In the car, in that same seat where I sat every day? How many times had he said I had to stay late at work while I believed him without hesitation? 3 years is a long time to be naive, but it's also a long time to build trust. And I hadn't built that trust in a vacuum. I built it through real conversations, through crises we survived together, through moments of shared vulnerability. Or at least, that's what I thought. I stayed in the bathroom long enough for Marcus to knock on the door. Hey, are you coming out soon? I'm making coffee. Almost, I answered. My voice sounded completely normal. That surprised me. Are you sure you're okay? You've seemed weird since the grocery store. I'm fine, I repeated. Just give me a minute. I heard his footsteps move back toward the kitchen. I slipped the receipt and the condom into the inside pocket of my jacket, splashed cold water on my face, stared at myself in the mirror for exactly 5 seconds, and walked out. Marcus stood with his back to me in front of the coffee maker. He was wearing the gray t-shirt I'd given him for his birthday the year before, the one he always said was his favorite. Seeing it on him that day triggered a brief, physical wave of nausea I had to force back down. With milk, he asked without turning around. Yes, please. I sat at the kitchen island and watched him move around. I had spent 3 years watching him move around that kitchen. I knew every one of his habits, the way he always used too much coffee, how he whistled absent-mindedly when he was in a good mood, how he left the spoon resting on the edge of the jar instead of putting it in the sink. And yet, in that moment, he was a stranger. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. Well, the betrayal was devastating, but what was really dismantling me from the inside was something else, the performance. The ease with which he had maintained two parallel realities. The natural way he had looked me in the eyes that very morning, held my hand in the parking lot, joked around in the cereal aisle, while I had absolutely no idea. That required practice. That wasn't some drunken one-night mistake. That was a pattern. He handed me the coffee. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, just like always. Thanks, I said. You're welcome, babe. I sipped the coffee slowly, staring out the window while I built a plan in my head. Because I'm not the kind of person who explodes in the moment. I never have been. When something truly hurts me, I freeze first and process later. And inside that frozen state, I found a strange kind of clarity, almost clinical. Before confronting him, I needed to know more. I didn't want to walk into that conversation with two pieces of evidence. I wanted the whole story. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I picked up his phone from the nightstand. I knew the passcode because he'd given it to me a year earlier, in a gesture of trust that at the time had seemed romantic. I typed the 4 digits slowly, holding my breath, and the screen unlocked. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There was a conversation in a messaging app one didn't use, one that would have gone completely unnoticed if I hadn't been specifically searching for something out of place. The contact name was just an initial S. I opened the conversation. The most recent messages were from Thursday night. I just left. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll be waiting. I bought what you asked for. You're the best. And then later, close to 11 at night, I got home. Thanks for everything. No, thank you. Take care. You too. Soon. I closed the app, put the phone back on the nightstand exactly where I'd found it. Then I lay down on my side of the bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to Marcus's calm breathing beside me. Soon, he had said. Which meant it wasn't over. For the next 3 days, I said nothing. I know that probably sounds impossible. People in movies confront each other immediately, cry, throw things, slam doors. But real life works differently, at least mine does. I kept waking up beside him, drinking coffee across from him, answering his texts during the day, and falling asleep each night with the weight of what I knew sitting in my chest like a stone. What I did instead was observe and search. I started paying attention to things I had never questioned before. The hours he came home. The weekends when he had work commitments or plans with the soccer guys. The short 2-day trips he'd taken over the past few months for meetings out of town. The architecture of his lies was more elaborate than I'd imagined. They weren't improvised lies, the kind that collapse under a direct question. They were lies built carefully, with internal consistency, with the kind of detail that requires conscious effort. The following Wednesday, I got a lucky break I hadn't expected. Marcus asked me to send him a document he had left printed at home. He gave me access to his email so I could find the original attachment. I went into the inbox looking for the file, and while scrolling through his folders, I found something that shouldn't have been there, or at least something he thought wasn't there anymore. A hotel reservation. 2 weeks earlier. One night. A boutique hotel downtown, 40 minutes from where we lived. Double room. Breakfast for 2 included. That weekend, I had gone to visit my sister because she'd had minor surgery. Marcus had told me he was sorry he couldn't come with me, that he had work he couldn't postpone. I'd understood. I told him not to worry about it. And while I was at my sister's house helping her recover, he had been in a hotel with someone else. I wrote down the hotel's name in my phone. I searched through his emails for any mention of S. I found a thread labeled internal project between Marcus and an address I didn't recognize, with messages that looked professional on the surface but carried a subtext that was suddenly impossible for me not to see. The email address gave me the full name, Sophie Mercer. Sophie. I searched for her name. She wasn't hard to find. We had 2 mutual friends on social media, which meant she wasn't a complete stranger but someone orbiting the same social circle we did. She was a graphic designer, lived in the city, and was 26 years old. Her photos were all travel shots, coffee on rooftop patios, sunsets glowing gold behind buildings. She looked completely normal. She looked like anybody. I wondered if she knew he had a girlfriend. I wondered if she cared. I wondered if I would matter to her at all if we ever crossed paths somewhere. Thursday night, Marcus came home at 7. On time, for once. We had dinner together. He talked about a difficult meeting he'd had that morning, about a coworker he couldn't stand, about a series he wanted us to watch together over the weekend. I nodded, answered with carefully measured one-word replies, while internally weighing every sentence against everything I now knew. After dinner, while I was washing dishes, he walked up behind me and kissed my neck. Hey, he said softly. You've seemed distant lately. Are you really okay? I went completely still under his touch. I'm fine, I said. I've just had a lot on my mind from work. Do you want to talk about it? The cynicism of that question nearly broke me. Do you want to talk about it? Coming from him. In that moment. No, I said. I'm okay. Really. He let go of me. Walked back into the living room. I placed the last plate on the drying rack and allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to stare out the window at the dark street before drying my hands and following him. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him yet, but I was going to do something I had resisted out of respect for my own pain. I was going to talk to Sophie Mercer. I wrote to her from an anonymous account I created specifically for that. I don't know how long I spent drafting that first message. I wrote and deleted versions for nearly an hour. The early ones were angry and accusatory. The middle ones were cold and calculated. The final one was simply honest. I told her I was Marcus Rivera's girlfriend, that we had been together for 3 years, that I had found evidence of what was happening between them and that I wasn't contacting her to attack her, but because I needed the full truth before making any decision. I told her she could ignore the message if she wanted, that I would understand. She replied 2 hours later. Hi. I need to tell you something important. Can you talk over video call? We connected that same night, when Marcus was already asleep and I was sitting in my car parked on the street half a block from our apartment. Sophie Mercer in person was different from her photos. She had dark circles under her eyes. She looked like someone who also hadn't slept properly in days. In a word, she looked broken. The first thing she said was, I didn't know he had a girlfriend. She said it before any greeting, before anything else, as if she needed that to be established before continuing. How long has this been going on? I asked. 7 months, she said. We met at a work event. He told me he was single. He said he had ended a long relationship recently and that he was fine. 7 months. I did the calculation silently. 7 months ago, Marcus and I had gone to a wedding together. I had worn a blue dress he loved. We had danced until 2 in the morning, and on the drive home he had told me I was the person he wanted to grow old with. When did you find out I existed? I asked. Sophie looked away before answering. 3 weeks ago. I saw a photo on his phone. I asked him who you were. He said you were a college friend he sometimes hung out with in groups. She paused. I believed him. I didn't want to not believe him. I understood that feeling perfectly. And after that I started noticing things. He couldn't meet certain days. He never invited me to his place. And when I asked about his daily life, he would change the subject in a way that felt normal at first, but over time started to feel strange. Another pause. This week I asked him directly if he had a girlfriend. He said no. But something about his face didn't convince me. I looked at her through the screen. 10 minutes into the call, I already felt like I knew her more than I ever wanted to. Are you still with him? I asked. She shook her head. I ended it last week. That's why I looked like that in his phone. I told him I needed time to think, that something didn't add up. He's been texting me every day since. I took out my phone and opened the conversation with Marcus that I had saved in screenshots. I showed her a few messages, enough for her to confirm it was the same conversation she knew from her side. When she saw them, she covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my God, she said very quietly. I don't know how long we stayed on the call. At some point Sophie started crying in that silent, restrained way people cry when they're trying not to lose control. I didn't cry. I was still frozen in that strange state that had begun in the supermarket parking lot and hadn't thought since. Before ending the call, Sophie said something I didn't expect. There's something else I think you should know. Something he told me about you too. She paused as if deciding whether to continue. What? I asked. He told me your relationship had been only formal for a long time, that you didn't feel like a couple anymore, that you were together out of habit but had emotionally ended things a long time ago. She paused again, small and heavy. He said that to justify us. To convince me there wasn't anyone real who could get hurt. The silence that followed was the longest of the night. And you believed him? I finally asked. Sophie took several seconds to answer. I wanted to believe him, she said. There's a difference. Yes, there was. And I knew it too. When I got back to the apartment, Marcus was still asleep. I climbed into bed fully dressed, stared at the ceiling, listened to his calm breathing, guiltless, weightless, and made the decision I had been quietly building for 10 days. Tomorrow. I was going to tell him tomorrow. But then his phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was late. Almost 1 in the morning, and yet someone was texting him. I reached over slowly, picked up the phone, entered the code. The message was from an unsaved number. It only said, we need to talk. Tomorrow. It's urgent. It's not about us, it's about something I did that affects more people. I stared at that message for so long that the screen turned itself off. I turned it back on, read it again, turned it off. I didn't reply. I didn't move the phone from its place. I lay back down, eyes open, my heart beating in a rhythm that didn't feel like mine. Something I did that affects more people. How many more people? How many threads were there behind this one? Was Sophie the only one, or just one among several? Was I the only one who didn't know, or were there others asleep in other apartments carrying the same stone I had been carrying for 10 days? I didn't sleep. At 6:30 in the morning, when the room started filling with gray light, Marcus woke up. He reached an arm toward me with that automatic gesture of someone who still believes everything is fine, and I sat up before he could touch me. He looked at me. Are you okay? It was the 3rd time in 10 days he had asked me that question, and all 3 times I had said yes. This time, I said nothing. I reached into the nightstand on my side, where I had kept the 2 things that everything had started with. I placed them on the bed between us. The condom in its plastic wrapper. The pharmacy receipt dated Thursday. Marcus froze, staring at both objects. I saw the exact moment his brain processed what it was seeing. I saw his expression go through that sequence people go through when they're caught: confusion first, then recognition, then something that, in his case, wasn't guilt but calculation. I saw him thinking about which version of the story he would tell. Let me explain, he said. No, I said. Listen to me, please. No, it was the first time in 3 years I had said no like that. No softening. No but or just let me understand or tell me. Just no. I got out of bed, went to the closet, took out the medium suitcase we used for weekend trips, opened it on the bed, and started packing. Not everything. Not that day. Just what I needed for the next few days. Wait, Marcus said. He stood up too, tried to take my hand. I pulled it away without hesitation, without force. I know about Sophie, I said while continuing to fold clothes. I know you've been together for 7 months. I know about the hotel 2 weeks ago. I know you told her our relationship was only formal to justify yourself. I paused, picked up my headphones from the nightstand, put them in the suitcase. And I know someone texted you last night saying there's something else, something that affects more people, and that you needed to talk today. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It was the silence of someone who has completely run out of script. How do you know all that? He finally said. Because I'm not stupid, I said. I was just very trusting. There's a difference. I had just understood it myself a few hours earlier, thanks to Sophie. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed. I saw his posture change, his shoulders drop forward, and for a moment he looked very young, very small. And there was a fraction of a second, just one, where I felt the old, familiar urge to sit next to him and ask what was wrong. I recognized it. I let it pass. I kept packing. She meant something, he said quietly. I didn't know if he expected that to make me feel better or worse. I know, I said. And that's probably the most honest thing you've said in months. You mean something too. You mean everything. I stopped, looked him directly in the face for the first time since I'd started packing. No, I said. That's not how it works. You don't get to mean everything to someone and do what you did. One of those things is a lie. He didn't respond. I closed the suitcase, put it on the floor, took my jacket, my bag, my keys. At the door, I paused for a moment, not because I was hesitating, but because I wanted to make sure I remembered it exactly. The room with the gray morning light, the suitcase on the floor, Marcus sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me leave. The message from last night, I said. Reply to it. Whoever it is deserves the truth. Just like I did. I closed the door without slamming it. I went down the stairs, out of the building. The street at that hour was almost empty, and the morning air had that clean, cold feeling of beginnings, even though I knew what was starting wasn't something I had chosen. I sat on the bench in front of the building, put the suitcase beside me, took out my phone and texted my friend Anna, "Can I stay with you for a few days? I'll tell you everything when I get there." She replied in 30 seconds, "I'm already getting your room ready." I called a taxi, waited with my back straight and my feet on the ground, watching the street wake up slowly. I didn't cry there. I would later, a lot, in that ugly, unstoppable way that can't be controlled. But in that moment, I was too busy processing something I hadn't expected to feel, a strange kind of clarity. Not relief yet. Not peace, not even close. But clarity. I had spent 10 days carrying a truth that wasn't mine. 10 days being the only person in that story who didn't know the whole story. Now I knew. And it turned out that knowing, even if it hurt in a way that still didn't have a name, was infinitely better than continuing to sleep in the same room as a lie. The taxi arrived. The driver greeted me with a kind gesture. I got in, placed the suitcase at my feet, and as the car pulled away, I didn't look out the back window. I kept looking forward.